Fallout 2's development started very shortly after Fallout 1's. Tim Cain announced this in December of 1997, not even 60 days after Fallout 1's release in October. According to Tim Cain himself, nearly 20 years later, so take this with some salt, Fallout 2 started before Fallout 1 released. The foundational ideas I can totally see being made, but full development not so much. It's likely that Fallout 1's development rolled directly into Fallout 2's development, with some people, according to Fergus Urquhart, being taken to work on Planescape Torment being put right back on Fallout 2. That's not literally what he said, but I figure with enough context that can be assumed. Information about Fallout 1 and 2 is almost always being released, so a straight timeline is hard to build. Was the pain and crunch worth it? Immediately, it can't be disputed, it was. It was the third most sold PC game of November, and, of course, lives on in the happy memories of many gamers. That doesn't sound good, but it was the tough month. Heretic 2, Oddworld, Ocarina of Time, and of course, heavy hitter Redguard, released around that time. In the long term, most of its developers found something to criticize. Tim Cain left during development, citing too many obnoxious references, counterpoint The Outer Worlds, better counterpoint South Park Stick to Truth. The main reason, though, was interference from marketing, which he hated, though from his own admission here.
First of all, I was super exhausted. I was physically exhausted, I was mentally exhausted, my soul was empty from literally almost a year of crunch on Fallout 1. Then I was told that Fallout 2 had to be out by the following October in 98, meaning we're looking at a year of crunch, a whole game in less than a year. We're looking at a year of crunch ahead of us. And I don't know if I could do that. So I walk out of that meeting and I just happen to go in the hallway and Brian Fargo's there. And he looks at me and goes, "What happened?" And I said, "I just had a meeting and I found out decisions are being made on Fallout 2 that not only I don't like and don't agree with, but I wasn't even a part of." And he goes, "What? Nobody should be doing that. What happened?" And I told him about the box cover and he goes, "Do you want me to fire her?" And I was like, "No, I don't want you to fire her. I just want to be involved in these decisions. I don't understand." I said, "I just wanted to go back to what Fallout was like. Just let us go aside and make a game for you. We just proved that we can do it. Why do we have to prove it again?" Didn't matter.
Tim Cain had a lot more control of the company than he probably thought, including firing people who stood in his way. He then went on to make Troika with some Fallout 1 veterans. Chris Avallone called Fallout 2 slapdash and recently admitted to it doing damage to the larger franchise and setting, though I can't say I agree since it's only the second game. I don't find it overly silly, but it did open the door to weirder situations and overall took the franchise in a less unique direction, though again, it's far from an unsalvageable situation. Ironically, I find what happened to Interplay with Fallout to be similar to Gearbox with Borderlands, sucking up funding from other games, releasing a critical hit, only to overextend and almost die. Also, like Borderlands, the first two games had unique villains, only for the series to become so obsessed with the second game's villain that it can't let go, with spin-offs being the exception. Chris Avallone took over for Tim Cain, becoming not just the lead, but now the project lead, cooperating with Fergus Urquhart, though again, sourcing is difficult and every word on this is post hoc. The mental image ought to be familiar. It's essentially Fallout New Vegas in reverse, with Tim Cain rejoining Obsidian after New Vegas. This is important to really only me to point out before I play the game to set expectations. I also want to point out how much opinions and thoughts change after 20 years. At the time, no one really had any large complaints except Avallone, while now everyone seems to have some regret. I think it's a mix of hindsight and tar-tinted glasses living on what seemed to be an extremely chaotic time. Tim admits he probably is not as good a producer as he thought from working on Fallout. Chris has infrequent criticisms all over the place, and Fergus doesn't talk about it much at all, outside of an interview from 2007 where he says, "We set out what we wanted to do with Fallout 2 outside of some compromises. The problem is that Fallout 2 is experimental and it sounds like no one really got what they wanted despite putting in their all. Sad, but let's get into the game." Quick side note, to get what I think is the better high-resolution mod on GOG's Fallout 2, delete ddraw.ini and ddraw.dhl from the directory. This removes the sfall high-res and keeps the other high-res. It's a personal preference. From future games, it's hard to see the Enclave killing otherwise pure in quotations Vault Dwellers, but it's not like they've ever been consistent between games anyways. The intro also doesn't really say anything like the first game, so there's not much to flat out criticize or praise in a message sense. Our first character is going to be pretty similar to our original Banana Sam, but I know a lot more now, so ripe Ralphie. Stat progression and choices have been overhauled, but Ralph won't look too different. Skill calculations from stats are different, but in practice, mostly the same. Perks first. Gifted is too good to let go of since it still hasn't changed. Skilled is different though. Instead of 10 to all skills immediately and gain less perks, We gain 5 extra skill points per level up and gain less perks. Instead of instant rewards, skill does a slow burn perk, and since I expect Fallout 2 to take a lot longer to complete, I take it. This is also because after looking at a perk list, there just isn't that much that looks good to me. Fallout is about energy weapons, they're a cornerstone of the franchise, but I've never used big weapons before and want to figure out why they're so disliked. Plus, Banana Sam already used energy weapons. The other perks that's really viable is small frame, but that's more so for builds that won't be carrying a lot of stuff around, and while it's almost out, I do still have the collect everything brainworm. None of the other perks are nearly as beneficial and play more to niche builds or are outright useless. Chem resistant and reliant aren't terribly good since addictions still aren't that bad. Sex appeal seems out of place since charisma determines almost nothing since the speech options are affected by intelligence and speech. Good-natured's negatives are too low, to the point I don't know if fighting an ant would be viable even with the gifted perk. Kamikaze Sequence Edition is fine, but the armor class reduction is pretty bad. The rest go into the category of specific builds. Jinxed and Finesse seem like they go well together, or maybe not since they seem a little redundant, but cool options for luck builders. Heavy-handed and Bruiser for anti-luck hand-to-hand melee players are sure, maybe. The outlier is Bloody Mess. See the most gruesome animations. I like the idea, but taking it over something that's helpful, I just don't recommend playing for a one-time or first-time player, such as myself. For skills, it's hard not to pick small guns, since they're just really good. Fallout 2 is a talky game, so speech will probably come in handy. The last one is Lockpick. This is more of a biased pick, since the last Fallout playthrough died because I couldn't get into Gizmo's room. It was locked. Unarmed and melee are both strength-based, and melee is viable, but I'm relying on base pretty high unarmed to get me through the start, and speech to get past the end guard. Repair and science get leveled as we go and as we need, since their uses, if Fallout is anything to go by, sparsely located in the middle and end game. This leaves most of the other skills, which have a niche, but I'm not in it. Yes, I have learned to never use Outdoorsman again. That being said, it is slightly more useful. A perk will allow you to run faster on the overmap, and higher number means less standard encounters, meaning more unique encounters. Problem: random encounters are fun. I don't want only positive events. 2, there's no real time limit. Technically it's 13 years, but there's not enough content to even pass 2 years. For attributes, 4 strength, 5 perception, 6 endurance, 7 charisma, 9 intelligence, 10 agility, and 6 luck. Strength can get raised through armor, perception is not useful enough to be raised, but not useless enough to get rid of. Endurance raises health a smidge. Charisma is for talking better, but I didn't know that it's not that good before I did the playthrough. Intelligence is for skill points, and also talking. Agility is for shooting twice in one turn, and luck is just nice to have. I was playing XCOM 2 recently to get a better grip of turn-based games, and I think Fallout would have been slightly better if you could take multiple attacks with less than 10 action points, but at a small to moderate aim reduction after the first shot. This is ripped right out of the XCOM 2 robot, but I think it feels better. This build makes actually going through the Temple of Trials and some of the early game painful. There's no small guns in or around the temple. The temple acts as an official filter for bad builds, but considering I have a good build and made it through by the skin of my teeth, and there's no dedicated melee sections besides an optional boxing segment in the game, I'm judging the temple as bad. Considering the people who created it, it's kind of amazing that it even exists. Tim Kaine thinks of Fallout as a sandbox and was forced to put in a tutorial and I think left before its final form.
Everything happened. The Temple of Trials at the beginning of Fallout 2, we were mandated to put that in. We were told there had to be a tutorial. I said, can people skip it? No. What about on subsequent playthroughs? No.
The temple would be good if Fallout 2 was more focused on survival and resource management, but this isn't the case. The fix for this is easy. Either give the player a horrible small gun, like a crossbow or bow or an arrow, or take 5 to 10% hit chance away from the ants. Better yet, give that to the player just for the intro. Alternatively, running through is very viable, which I unfortunately recommend. It sorta sucks that the Temple of Trials has 1, no actual trials. It's a test by the village to make sure you survive the wasteland, and 2, skipping it is the best way to accomplish it. Either you have enough speech to get through the gatekeeper, or have enough health left and unarmed to beat through. Thieves can steal the key he has too, but I don't lend to playing thieves. Instead, there should be keys or tasks to complete within the temple that make use of skills. After some research, it turns out that my opinion isn't particularly unique. Almost every YouTube video, interviewer, gamer hates it. The most generous thing I've found is, a tutorial would be nice, but this isn't it. According to an interview with Tim Kaine, the Temple of Trials was a marketing idea, and while it's not asked, it's implied, Tim has less than favorable things to say about it. Of all known compromises Fergus mentioned, this was probably the worst, and whoever was head of Interplay's marketing hopefully has learned from this mistake. I don't want attention to be taken away from the developers though. They were forced to make a tutorial level, but they weren't forced to make it bad. Considering Tim Kaine was still on the project, the problem was likely the beginning of conflicting ideas. Once we finish the temple and we get put out into the tribe, it's a mess. The old people speak sort of religiously, putting poetics and importance in sentences described with words like holy, godly, and reverence.
You have survived the Temple of Trials. Are you ready for your quest? Then take this flask. It is from the Holy Vault 13. Vic, a trader in Klamath, brought it to us. He may know where the vault is. You may also need some of what they call money. Here. What do you need? The Holy 13? I cannot help you. Only the Vault Dweller knew. His tales have the sound of a perilous journey.
While the young people talk normal. Despite this town forming up around worship of Vault 13 in the first game's Dweller, there's no art here showing it, and only the Elder even references it. It's a very generic village. Also, it's been at least 30 years since the previous game. Why are there only tents, a garden, fenced-in Brahmin? There should be huts. Maybe there should be a knowledge-keeping shaman, or the Elder should be that, surrounded by books. Did they spend 30 years building the temple and reproducing and nothing else? There's also so few things to do around here, but so many resources, it's hard to believe that barely any progress has been made in improving the standard of living. There's introductory quests here in case you weren't bored enough by the Temple of Trials. Fixing the water well grants a level, but with such low repair skill, I really just got lucky. The two other quests are killing plant monsters and finding a dog. Compared to FallOut, the content so far is pretty weak. We're helping individuals, not really societies, do things that they by themselves seem more capable to do for pity rewards. I at least sort of expected a tribal conflict like Vault 13, where some of the people wanted to start new self-sufficiency actions while the elders wanted all their faith in you. The shaman is the only person who really talks to us, and since he's sort of an outcast, it's not a good chance to learn about the village. Well, it's okay. I keep having this nightmare about giant metal men coming, but I'm sure it'll be fine. More sleep powder, please. The elder told me to go to Klamath, so I go. I raid everyone's house for anything I can carry. From my understanding, the plot follows closely to FallOut 1's, but without a Vault 15 analog, but I guess I'll find out. Klamath is a dump, but is one of the few towns not in a drug-induced stupor. This is the real tutorial village, and I think it's a better introduction to sandbox thinking. We find out that Vic was here once after talking to a local bartender, and there's an important person found out via having a talking head, Sulik, that could potentially join us.
What can we and I do you for?
One of the locals also sells a weapon I'm spec'd into, so I have a couple of goals that boil down to make money. At the village, it is common for the community to pay back into itself if an economic gesture is required, so I rummage through everyone's belongings to find money or hides to sell for Sulik. Then I take Sulik to help out with some more combat-focused areas to get a little more reward, buy the 10mm, and help out old Whiskey Joe. We can explore and find it easily, but Joe tells us that Vic had a shack here that we can loot for whatever. We can also get scrubbed clean by a local redhead who will tell you the same, but it'll cost a little bit more. On the west side, there's a crashed vertibird and a handy bot, but the body can despawn if too much time is taken. Note for the future, this wasn't worth it. Klamath is a much better introduction to the game than the Temple of Trials. Enemies are strong, but there's more, or any, resource to take advantage of. Quests are direct and upfront, something the next area lacks, and using player brain, I can act without being told what to do. Early spec progression is also available between melee unarmed and small arms. I don't stay long here, and there doesn't seem like much of any reason to go back. FallOut 2 does sort of have a problem with early progression. It's easy to get a bunch of levels fast without engaging in or with anything. Just talking to people and asking them questions grants a decent amount of experience, and there's even non-committal combat quests that grant a great amount of experience. This is the case for Vault City, Gecko, Den, Modoc, Black Hills, and San Fran. If you bring Vic to his daughter in Vault City, you get to witness one of the most awkwardly written arguments I've ever seen in a game, including the Vault Dweller speaking out loud without input. Speaking of speaking without input, I really do miss the Ask About feature. It helps make FallOut 2 more unique by lacking it, but I use that feature a lot. There were a lot of things that were awkward to bring up in the middle of an unrelated conversation and too much to have dedicated dweller dialogue written for it, but it allowed for a lot more variety in characters that wouldn't come through a conversation naturally.
Brilliant guy. A doctor and philosopher. Long ago, he led the expedition where I got changed into a mutant. Who? Is he some sort of sex therapist? I could use one, you know.
So far, dialogue isn't as good either. It's almost entirely linear, and I know I'll catch flack for this, but it kind of reminds me of Fallout 4. A lot of quests have the same options. Yes, no, yes, but I want more money, yes, but I want more karma, and yes, but I want more stim packs or ammo or something. Characters with heads, the coolest graphical thing happening besides death and destruction, often are either off-putting like Sulik having a nose bone that goes through his ears and nose, going on about grumpy bone and spirits, or Harold being a lot different and seemingly having less character. We knew a lot about Harold and about the same amount of dialogue that, if you were to pick up Fallout 2, all you know is that Harold is the leader of Gecko and the leader of Gecko ghouls. Sulik might also be having his seed taken from him by the Klamath leading women. I realized after research that one of the reasons behind this is likely because the lead artist left and the clayheads take ages to make and animate, so Fallout 1 beats 2 by a long shot in that. Part of the problem is that a lot of stuff is lampshaded mid-dialogue. Sulik's seed, Harkonnen liking you, Vic living in town but no one really knowing him besides a prostitute and a drunk, you having an aunt, the Temple of Trial. It's going to be hard to find the dialogue, but there is shade thrown at the Temple of Trials when talking to Mama, a rat sketty maker in the den. You also have to go through multiple dialogue options, sometimes just to exit dialogue. Vic is a good example. Metzger, Vic's slaver/owner, hates Vic and wants someone to take him off his hands. So despite having a very high speech skill and Vic, well, me really, fixing the radio, Metzger still wants a very large sum. Not to mention I helped one of Metzger's gangers be better at something. There's also a massive jet problem and a new carcinogen in the ways that we can't do anything about within the den. To make ends meet, I start digging up graves, which, while rewarding as a pastime, gives me a trait that doesn't affect anything. I honestly wasn't expecting it just because it never has in any other game. Since this is more of a low-level bracketed area than one town, let's take it by quest push. That is, taking it how the main quest leads me. The den is a junkie's second-hand paradise. The living standard is extremely low, and it's not too different to Necropolis except for that the zombies aren't hostile. Apparently Vic... No, his name's not Vic, is it? Are there two Vics? Anyway, some Italian on the south side is the recipient of children's stealings, but nothing was taken from me, so I left him alone. He has some good loot and no guards, but I never found myself angry enough to kill an NPC. If there was a town worth obliterating, though, it probably would be the den. There's only one good-coded person, the lady named Mama, but her food is expensive anyway for rat food. The loot isn't too bad, and would be a good jumpstart in the game for equipment. After the den, we're led to Vault City. The guards aren't friendly but not hostile either, though it's not uncommon for them to be too ruthless when it comes to beating outsiders. They need the XP, there's monsters in Gecko. Getting into Vault City isn't too hard, but requires the brain to be turned on somewhat. We can steal a day pass, where we can exist in the city from morning to evening. We can get one just for having the vault suit out. I never got armor, so it's on by default. Or we can get forged papers, but it's apparently pretty noticeable to have a random new person in the community of only a few hundred that looks rough and is bringing in a tribal, a local from the outside whose raid made the rounds, and someone who's effectively outcast for going past city limits. That's not taken into account, but all the merchants tell us that going outside the walls for a shop would be better. Where do you think I came from? Lynette is our target. Everyone's been telling me to go to her to get real citizenship, well, everyone, as in the bartender on the south side. First Citizen Lynette is technically president, but the legislative branch can overrule her. She's pretty hated, but a lot of dialogue options are straight up hostile to her.
These are authentic. Unbelievable. You are a survivor from another vault. Welcome to our city. You must have suffered much in the outside world.
I don't think people realize that, 1, she's from a gated community, and so she's from an underdeveloped social world, and 2, on a power trip. We can get more context from the head of the legislature. He has no head despite being arguably more important than Lynette. The problem is less the monsters at Gecko and more with leaking irradiated water. Surprisingly, Vic has nothing to say about this considering his wife died of this water. I think we're not meant to like him since he was sort of a deadbeat dad even before being captured by slavers and has no combat skills and walks extremely slowly. I can fix him. Gecko is led by Harold and he wants the power plant fixed since right now it's one bad day away from melting down. It seems like that bad day has actually already happened, with Harold stopping at moments before, well, being unstoppable. He's a lot less talkative and enthusiastic despite living a pretty better life than compared to begging at the hub. Vault City has a replacement part and we can act as a mediator to fix the reactor. I think talking to Skeeter first broke Harold's dialogue permanently. Actually, there's a few dialogue bugs here. We need a form for a part to get from Skeeter for the car, and there's a car in the den, but neither Festus nor Harold give us the form, so I'd have to steal it. I can either roll the dice on Festus fixing the reactor or fixing it myself using trial and error. We get the experience problem, but worse. Fixing the reactor is a big deal and grants a ton of experience, but has no skill checks. Well, maybe speech or intelligence at some point, but the XP reward is far too massive for such a low effort. Contrast this with saving Smiley. Smiley is lost somewhere north of Klamath. I knew it was full of geckos and green lava, so I left it for later. Sure, it's a beginner combat quest, but there's not really any direct combat quests in Vault City or Gecko or whatever. Saving Smiley requires a ton of healing. Not for me, I know how to wear boots, but my companions eat a ton of damage. He's not worth saving, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Point is, doing this eats a ton of ammo, healing, and time, which makes it not worth doing when there's experience to be gained simply by showing up elsewhere. I even tried stealing from him, but the only thing of value he gave us is a smidgen of XP and the ability to skin geckos, which will be rare, but still sort of valuable from now on. Not much compared to the 7,000 experience from fixing and then optimizing the reactor. Speaking of time wasting, Harkonnen calls me on Dreamcord.
Once again my spirit touches you from the void. Chosen, our crops fail, our reserves are meager. Return to us with the gag. Your failure is our last light.
I rushed to Vault 15 because of this. Saving the reactor for Vault City opens up main quest info and not much else. I'm rushed now. And hey, Fallout 1 had a timer. Maybe this one does too, just unseen, but no. Every 3 months from the start, Harkonnen calls you to let you know that you're supposed to be doing the main quest. I didn't know this and died, or reloaded because a companion died half a dozen times. Fallout 2 does technically have a timer of 13 years, but I doubt that that's actually been tested. I really just think Black Isle should have been more decisive. I actually think a timer is a good idea to maintain focus and not mess around. Quest timers are sort of broken. They start when you accept a quest, not at a dedicated time point. But this could have been an opportunity to strategize time usage, and potentially giving alternate quests to make things up for late quest givers. Anyway, Ralph is hungry, and after eating only Brahmin jerky for 2 weeks, and Cassidy mentioned something about omelets at Modoc. Modoc is about to become a literal hole. It sucks. Half of my restarts at the time were here, mostly due to messing up an explosion timer. There's almost painfully little to do here, but it's kind of fine. Not every location has to be Reno. There's a secret about this town. The bed and breakfast is legendary for its massive omelet, but the eggs are ginormous. Must be one big chicken back there. A lot of people find this place gross, and we end up covering the town in literal sewage. A tannery already had it seem disgusting, and a drought is about to end this place. Sounds not too different from our tribe, and besides Gecko, this place doesn't deride us for being uncivilized. Maybe I do want to go back to my tent. They're jealous of a very well-ran but seemingly empty farm nearby, but it's just ran by mole people who are happy to help. Almost like there's a theme or something happening, but I don't know, I can't read. Come to think of it, I'm not actually sure we should be able to read unless more people in the village have pit boys. No, well. I go back to the den to buy my soon-to-be car, but we're a little low on money. Besides some failed Metzger murder attempts, I've got to go to the next town and hope they have work. Redding is a gold mine. Let's see if that dried up too. I leave immediately after figuring out what's going on. There's a mine full of downright evil critters called Wanamingos, but that mine has a part that can power up either of the non-infested mines to finally destroy the other miners. It doesn't sound bad until you actually get to the Wanamingos and they tear through everything. All the towns that act like they're better than my tribe tend to have awful, life-threatening problems, while the one that acts like they're better than their competitor just tend to thrive. Maybe it's a morale thing when they have literally nothing else. At least we're not tribal, says the town with an alien infestation quickly running out of resources. We need money and experience fast, but there's a bit of a disconnected character in Reno. So far it's been difficult, besides in Gecko and Vault City, to maintain moral scruples. It's hard to not either sell my character's body or other people's bodies for money and or experience. As a philosophical virgin, my character isn't or shouldn't be prepared to take another human life, especially in non-self-defense situations. In Reno, this is nearly impossible. I tried to pick the most respectable-seeming gang, the Salvatores, but fear of the consequences of failure led to an even larger failure. After spending a few days curled up in the fetal position in Old Man Salvatore's bed, I decided to grab the car since killing a small gang gets small riches and that's just enough for it. Then I make a push towards NCR. They're a decent lead to the Gek, and Harkonnen Dream harassed me again. It seems like YouTuber tradition, so I fence it. I bang Bishop's wife, but not his jethead daughter. I bum over to Broken Hills, but this isn't the Brotherhood, it's almost the opposite. Instead of tech hermits, it's a diverse community with no mind for tech that accepts everyone. We can help a little bit, fixing the mines, restoring super mutant importance, and they can be productive again, and finding missing peoples. Killed by a super mutant in retaliation of hate speech. This is a peaceful community, so we're aiming at peaceful results. Except that there's a dark undercurrent of mutanon. But it's not my problem. Actually, Marcus, the leader of the community, is so bored that as long as you're not evil maxing, he'll join you. So I drop off Vic here, since his repair is lower than mine, and his aim is horrible. Onto the NCR, it's impressive to see Tandy. I think she's a bit old for this. We need to get some computer parts from Vault 15, which is currently occupied by squatters, who we find out are employed by the Khans. There are some spats and bad blood that we can exploit to take the Khans down, but I'm not geared for this. I just get the parts and go after finding Vault 13, which is apparently ran by talking Deathclaws. A lot of people thought this was silly, but I honestly don't mind it. Maybe it's exposure therapy to Bethesda's Fallouts, but I don't find it horribly wrong or unreal. They have a Gek and we can take it and run, or also fix their PC, which gives a level. On return to the village, it's dead. I didn't even see the dream I thought would happen that told us, but yeah, Enclave attacked the village and robbed it of its inhabitants. Nothing ever happens, bro, stay losing. I fixed the Deathclaw's PC after this and head to Mariposa. I'm running into a problem. Equipment-wise, I'm always behind. I don't have the strength to carry larger weapons. Actually, some pistols are too big for me and don't have the armor to withstand energy hits, which are becoming a lot more common. We need power armor, and I don't want to reload 30 times to grind a super mutant base. We were told about San Fran from a Brotherhood bellboy, so on we go. Fallout 1 sort of had this issue as well, that armor progression stopped, jumped, and then stopped again. I have a feeling this will happen here as well, especially since I'm trying to go for big guns. I know they're non-optimal, but I figured since the endgame is all about powered armor made to resist lasers, that explosive and armor penetration might come in handy. Problem: I don't think the main quests are sandbox enough, and side quests are too easy or too hard. So much of the main quests are already decided for you. The Deathclaws are 100% good, the Enclave are 100% evil, the NCR is 100% good, Reno is 100% evil. You can take advantage of the kindness of others, but there's no repercussions. The squatters will squat. Reno creates and is filled with hedonistic zombies, ran by gangs who pay no mind to debauchery, with the only good to be found in the practicality of a gun pervert who can modify weapons for you on the cheap. NCR, besides the many police officers, is almost only good with the exception of wider political ramifications, but they have hot water, electricity, private and public bathrooms. There's nothing redeeming about the Enclave unless you enjoy Black Sun memes. They help no one and are a cardboard cutout villain. I didn't know about this until later, but you can't even side with them. The Deathclaws should basically be not allowed to exist as they are without interference, which happens to them anyway. Everyone should be trying to hunt or attract them, and if the Enclave found and released them, Vault 13 should not be as hard to find as it is. I mean, the NCR probably heard the vertibirds flying or saw a sudden uptick in Deathclaw attacks or plasma goo around. So I go to San Fran. The Brotherhood asked me to go to Navarro to get vertibird plans. How hard could it be? I do not understand progression in Fallout anymore. I've just skipped almost all armors, and if I was using energy weapons, I'd have the second or third best in the game. This area feels like a joke, like it's an unemployment check for people who aren't equipped. I'm level 12 and completed most content, and I'm only now getting something better than metal armor? I did get combat armor, but only used it for about 2 missions. There's a sequence break where you can get this equipment extremely early on, killing all but endgame challenge. You don't even need training to wear it. All that's left to do are marginal upgrades, some permanent stat buffs here and there, finding heavy weapons, and stocking up for the final battle. I guess it makes sense to have a social security enclave armor, it's a messed up sort of way, but it's made worse that the main progression after armor, besides experience, is in stat boosts that are so obscure as to feel like Easter eggs. You might call this optimizing the fun out, but I didn't find it very fun to get roasted by mutants, not being able to shoot right from low strength, or having 3 companions, none of which are useful. Companions are another can of worms. They can be fun to bring along, but none have much of anything to contribute besides extra damage. Sulik was pretty good, Vic helped a little bit, Cassidy helped in a couple of hard battles, but only a couple, and Marcus and Ortis came in too late to really help all that much. I was hyped up and maybe that's why I'm so negative, but none of them have quests or all that much personality. All of them are bored or in debt and bored and just happy to leave with a unique weapon specialization. Since they're on pretty much the same equipment progression as me, their progression is painful and they're left in the dust in pretty much the same plot percentage as the Fallout 1 companions, maybe even earlier. Some have slightly more or less personality, so there's something to cling to. They aren't Skyrim companions, but they're still too little. Something to do with the game being rushed, I guess. Essentially, the problem comes down to armor, health, and a lack of good weapons. So everything to do with combat except primary stats. Companions do level up, but only have 5 before they stop, and their primary use is to take enemy fire since they're not the most competent. After I return the vertebrate plans to the Brotherhood, I get 2 levels and access to stock that I'm either not spec to use or have better already, but the main reasons to give them the plans, besides the 20k experience, is Zax 2, or Ace. Ace can add an additional point to some of the special stats. I only have the token that adds Charisma. Otherwise, we're out of luck when it comes to the main stats or quest. Our village has been taken to lands unknown, there's no Enclave contact or Brotherhood that's willing to help unless you count Ace, and there's none of those factions seem to know where they are. The only remaining lead is Mariposa and Camp Navarro, super mutants or Enclave. The combat shotgun isn't capable enough to take on either, so I decided to pick up some new weapons. As an avant-garde heavy guns user, the search is hard and I end up with a small gun anyway. Seeing as I found an electronic lockpick and there was a door I couldn't open, I tried on Smiley's old elevator, which contains a lot of energy weapons, stim packs, and most importantly, the Gauss rifle's ammo. I bought the weapon properly from Red 888. That's what the wiki calls the She Gun store, but it's sort of hidden and has no sign. Next to the ammo, I get a legendary Bozar, the weapon that one-shots me in NCR after attacking an officer. Fallout 1 had leeway since it was the first in the series, was crunched on for years while in the development of other games, and was unique. Now we're in the sequel. Instead of making use of all the potential damage types, there's now a smattering of new weapons, and I expected both. Weapons only truly take advantage of the theme, but so does armor, and it can be confusing mathematically. Basically, energy weapons are the most developed and common high-level weapons. Energy-resistant armor is the most common and developed high-level armor. Power armor is resistant to basically all damage types. What is the point of armor if it doesn't protect, is a counter I expect, but then the question becomes what's the point of different damage types? There's normal, laser, plasma, fire, explosive, and electric, in order by the wiki, with laser being the weakest by the end and ironically normal and explosive being the types with the least resistance. Runner-up goes to electric, which is now not exclusive to the alien blaster. Note that this is the only in the endgame. In the early and mid-game, any type except normal is acceptable. Even high damage normal is acceptable, but the lessening of damage through armor is far more noticeable when working with the lower numbers. This is important since it's common to fight competent enemies without foreknowledge, and these fights kind of suck. I almost always avoided them when possible. Fighting incompetent enemies seems like the way to go, as in grinding experience to level up, but levels are a lot less important than gears and money for gear. I've been frustrated, but that's because I didn't get it basically until the end. Also, 4 strength is not really enough. A great deal of small guns are 5 or higher strength to use, meaning each point below required takes 20% from the hit chance, and it's unclear if that's factored into the visual result, but I don't think it is. It's mostly noticeable when using burst. Because the mini-boss fights have a lot more fighters and they're a lot more difficult than almost anything in Fallout 1, at least when introduced to them by the story, gear progression is crucial. This makes a split energy weapons for the mid-game, big guns for the late game if you wanted to take full advantage of the damage system. Without testing, I think plasma and electric weapons can complete the game. Small guns fall off except a specific few. Gauss. I've got a Gauss rifle. Some ammos can penetrate armor, and Gauss is one of them. I attempt Mariposa, but am twisted into a pretzel by the super duper mutants and then dipped in fondue and eaten by Bellathor at the end summoning Deathclaws. The rocket launcher is nice, but I expect the oil rig to have one, so I kinda give up here. The discs held by Dead Enclave are all references, both the writing to some movie speech and name to some character, Colonel Sanders, Captain Picard, etc. I decide to reload since this is a sort of a gag area, and I don't have the know-how to defeat Melchior. For such an easily accessed area opening with weaker enemies, I expected any plot relevance, but the only relevance is to finding out that this is where the Enclave got their FEV, which doesn't come up. The mutants are overall stronger than the previous games, though if I had spec'd into energy, I think I'd have an easy time. Unfortunately, Marcus and Gortys perish here. I haven't quite gotten over companions at this point, so I reload and head to Navarro. Luckily, Navarro is exactly where I need to go. The terminal tells me that there are two primary ways to access the oil rig and gives me its exact coordinates. First is via ship. I know where one is. But the second method is via vertibird. Finally, a way to use the keycard from the start. Something to use the Navcom chip with, and a reason to tell Raoul that his mechanic is a bastard. Except this mechanic doesn't actually exist. I spent maybe half an hour trying to figure it out. Online, the confusion seems to stem from an early version of the Fallout 2 restoration project where this was implemented. The yellow card from Klamath isn't used, and the Navcom chip is for something else, and I guess the Raoul catfight is for funny. I do get a dog, though. I go to the oil tanker, but need to earn the trust of the captain. This can be done by clearing out the bottom floor of the tanker. Gortys and Marcus truly perish here. Gortys is missing armor and stim packs, while Marcus is missing ammo and armor. Ironically, human companions may not be bad here if they can equip combat armor, Brotherhood armor, or any higher tier armor. To completely prepare for the ship to sail, we need fuel, which I get by completing an easy fetch quest for the She, and we need a ship fob. This is only in Navarro. One murder spree later, I'm not roleplaying anymore, we're in murder hobo mode. The fob is mine, and I set sail for Poseidon Oil. Despite there not actually having been a sailing ship in a couple of centuries, there's an automatic acceptance of our landing. Actually, the guy sailing was an Enclave captain, so there could be something, but the Enclave aren't subtle and tend to not like leaving loose ends. Perhaps there could be a log in the prison about him being an alcoholic, or found bringing Jet on board, or something illegal, but he's friends with the president or something. If he wasn't the conveyor of our body to the oil rig, I wouldn't care that much, and I kinda don't care that much anyway. We finally meet the Enclave. Our first meeting with the Enclave is actually earlier. The intro to the game, if you let it idle, shows the Enclave massacring a Vault 13. They're incredibly inconsistent though across the series, they're sort of consistently inconsistent. The point of the Enclave here is their outer and inner culture. Outside-wise, they hate mutants and love the, quote, pure, unquote, so why would they destroy the Vault Dwellers? Answer, no one knows. It's really just to look cool, and given the parade about their existence from other reviewers, it worked. When we look at it from an inner culture, the existence of the Enclave is surreal and unlikely. It's Brotherhood too, but they hate you. Dornan doesn't show up all that often, and when he does, he too is inconsistent. The president and vice president are figureheads without much to do and have unclear roles. Does the president literally just stand at his desk all day? There's no country to govern, there's only 2 bases under military protocol. The vice president is the buffoon. How have they been eating for the last 100 years, or even just staying sane on the rig? It's also incredibly ironic that in a war over energy, an oil rig survived. It's a government black site, sure, but the She are literally right over there. On the rig, we have 2 directions to go from entry. East brings us to a supply room so I can replenish ammo stores, there's resources everywhere. The Enclave are also wearing a lot of Brotherhood power armor, so it'd be cool if they wore it in the future. I'm sure they will in the next 4 sequels. South brings us to the prison. We can meet Vault 13 dwellers and our village elder, not our aunt though for some reason. Although it's been confirmed to not be the case, with the direction of the Brotherhood, I could see a lot of them joining the Enclave. The Fallout has always had a time and population numbers problem. In Fallout 2, we only see 3 Brotherhood, and they're so secretive compared to Fallout 1. I think this is why the next 3 games focused on the Brotherhood, since they're just kind of missing from 2. The President tells us his super evil plans, but do we really care? Well, we only can. I think we could have had a villain ending like joining the Master. There's also only one way to destroy the Enclave, which we have to do. You can destroy them in a couple of ways, but they boil down to blowing up the reactor, so it'd be most accurate to say we can blow up the reactor in a couple of ways. We can either convince a guy to do it, or I can do it myself. It's very vague, and the game refers to the reactor as a mainframe, just a misnomer, probably the result of crunchy development, but I did get a little confused. Leaving is pretty painful. The guards stand in position, even the president will, despite the reactor exploding. Side note, you can convince a chemist to release poison gas into the air. It's all very vague, something to do with FEV. FEV also seems a lot closer to magical acid, emphasis on magic, so I'll let it be. I reload almost double the times across the rest of the game here, since my build, despite being end level, isn't particularly good. I just built almost everything entirely non-combat. My strategy was to dodge the most hostile of enemies by sneaking. These were only the security bots, but they aggroed all the guards in a room. I was able to reset guard aggro by leaving him coming in again, but this was pretty annoying since I still couldn't tell exactly what was so wrong about my character that angered them. A high enough sneak can eliminate this threat, 45 plus. We exit, not really even saving the villagers. I mean, a scientist told me he did, but we can't confirm this even with our generous time allotment. Before we do though, we're stopped by a giant enclave guy. I was going to talk to him, he seemed to be pretty famous in the community, but I turned on the turrets after convincing some enclave patrollers to help me, and between the 14 of us, the big guy went down so quickly. He doesn't seem to notice the boat waiting for us as we sail away and thinks we'll go down with a rig or something. Chud? I think this would be more poignant if he blocked the door in some way even after going down, improving our view that the guy was superhuman and not just very big. Cutscene starts, end slides roll, let's review. I actually think that the premise is fine. It gets repetitive in the grand scheme of media, but there isn't really a flaw in and of itself. Almost everything else is a good idea that's played out poorly, and by the end I did start skipping content since it got kind of repetitive. Mostly though, I think the RPG elements lacked sandbox play, and sandbox elements lacked RPG play, making a pretty disjointed end product. Too many quests are linear. They can branch out, but almost never can they be solved in multiple ways, like the mining rig chip in Reading. I didn't experience all of them, but Fallout 2 mostly succeeds in letting you play out all sides until the final decision, like playing all sides in the Reno gangs. Like the hub in the first game, there's a lot of situations where completing one quest too early can cut off dialogue that would start another quest, like the ghost running around in the den. Most quests can only be finished more extensively, like the gecko reactor. Compromise between factions is also extremely rare and exists almost only as linear quest result, like Modoc and Black Hills. More clearly from earlier, gear progression is done almost entirely from sandbox elements and skill progression from RPG elements. This is sort of due to the split in Wasteland inhabitants. Poor people are more peaceful and rich people are more violent, until the end of the game becomes a linear quest with some exception for the Sheehan Hubologists. I didn't mention it since I didn't really follow through with either, but the Hubologists should be known immediately by Americans, their name being a direct reference to L. Ron Hubbard. They're Scientologists, made even more apparent with a reference to Juan Cruz. They're trying to get a spaceship functional. The She are interesting, if a little bit far out, in that they're more of a reference to the ever-present powerful Chinatown from early 90s LA action movies. If you don't know, a quick reference would be to watch Big Trouble in Little China. They're just trying to expand their capabilities and potentially create a new empire, but to my knowledge this never comes up anywhere in the rest of the game, or even future of the series. Despite being one of the more interesting factions, they show up only at the end. The star of the show is New Reno. There's an amazing amount of interactable content to do there and experience, but I don't know how you'd stay there more than a day as a good character. Fallout 2 very much expects the player to align with the area they're in rather than align with whatever the character is set out as, with the exception of some sort of psychopath run. In Fallout 1, you can report the criminals to the police in the hub. It's smaller and was stuck in development hell as a revolutionary RPG, so it has leeway, but Fallout 2 should have had a year or so longer development, because it needed it. It's harder to give it a recommendation, but I think I still do. Here's some build advice, partly to myself and partly to potential players for generalist, non-strategic builds. There are extremely few intelligence and charisma checks in game. Intelligence can be set to 7 and that'll still allow for the gain of a lot of skill points. This is also for anyone who wants to do more in the game. Completing more quests and being any sort of completionist will put you at a higher level than me, but about par on skill, if not higher. Charisma, I'm iffy, but I think 4 or 5 would do if you want a third companion with a temporary stat buff. Party size checks are only activated when someone tries to join. Sulik and Vic just seem too necessary as fodder. That gives 5 points to work with. In order of special, 6, 6, 6, 4, 7, 10, 8. This is with gifted and skilled, but skilled could be left out if you like books. This should make combat in the early game a lot easier, make more quests available, and less of a cost-benefit analysis, and give enough luck to allow more criticals and gambling if you're inclined. Good luck in the wastes. Fallout 2 has 2 recipes, the Carrion Kabob and the Big One Pancake. To make the kebabs, I managed to get lucky and find a small pack of sheep shoulder and reduce the recipe to size, though I thought it was still going to be a bit much since shoulder has a lot of bone in it. Also mixed it up a little bit. First, mix the meat, which should be sliced into small cubes and have all the bone removed, with roughly the same amount of cups of Greek yogurt. Mix in garlic and lemon juice, make sure to make certain it's all mixed, and leave to marinate in the fridge for 4 hours at least, 24 for best results. Afterwards, preheat the oven to 350. Slice the peppers into squares and skewer them alternatingly with color and sheep. Place in oven for 12 minutes or so, and if you want char marks to mimic fire roasting, broil on high for 4 to 5 minutes. As always, be safe and careful when managing high heats like high broil. If you do this, you'll probably need to soak the wooden skewers or they can get a little ashy on the ends. Remember to turn your oven off. Sheep has a pretty unique flavor, and we don't have roasted peppers often, so it ended up being surprisingly good. The sheep price was a bit too high for the quantity I ended up with, and it wasn't particularly filling even after 2 kebabs. It pairs well with chips, both kinds, but I'd recommend probably beef or pork kebabs. For the Big One Pancake, some ahead of time criticisms, it is a little empty. It makes 8 servings of some very good bread, but requires either a lot of syrup and toppings, or a fix before you cook. I recommend a little sugar, a quarter or third of a cup if you want the bread to be sweeter, or when we pour it into the pan, add some fruits or nuts. First, preheat the oven to 425, then crack 4 eggs into a bowl and check for shells. Blend those eggs until they become a single liquid and gain a little paleness. Then add a cup of milk and flour, a quarter or a third cup at a time, or guesstimate, but neither all at once. I mixed skim and almond milk since I wasn't prepared for this recipe, and I used Kodiak flour, but I recommend whole milk and another flour if you have a taste preference. Once it seems like the batter has started to slow the blender, you should be able to hear it, but visually, once everything is mixed in, melt a third cup of butter, and a ton of mine blew over the microwave. Also use non-salted butter, or the end dish will taste a lot like salt. The manual asks for a souffle dish or a round high pan. Pour the melted butter into that round high pan, which is what I have, and then the batter. I didn't wait for the oven to preheat, and then I ended up waiting longer, and that darkened the bottom a bit too much, so just wait for the oven to preheat. Put it in for 20 to 25 minutes, but you're looking for the top to brown. Once that happens, take it out of the oven and wait another 5 minutes. The manual says it'll break apart, but with how much I ended up with changing, I can't say for average results or yours. Take a plate, put it on top, and flip it out. Cut into 8s and the dish is served. While the recipe needs some changing for preferences, it's at the core a really good base that I see myself using for mine. Now, could you eat these in Fallout? Carrion Kabob, yeah, very obviously, we could. That's actually almost everywhere in the game. The pancake, though, on the other hand, is probably... maybe not. We don't actually see any chickens in Fallout 2. And we don't see any grain or grain-based products, so it's hard to say if grains have really become a thing by now. Although we do see corn stalks, mutated though, so potentially corn flour? So that solves the flour, and of course the milk, you have ramen. The only other real ingredient would be the eggs. There's no chickens in Fallout, but there are death claws. So, yeah, you could make a death claw pancake, I guess, if you really wanted to try.